a third of which are children. And they're staring death in the face because disease, waterborne diseases, an army of mosquitoes, of other bacteria and viruses threaten them. As our community workers, our lady healthcare workers, our medical professionals are working around the clock, they cannot cover 35 million people. And going forward, as the waters drain, we will rebuild. We have to rebuild our lives, we have to rebuild their lives, we have to rebuild their houses, we have to rebuild their schools, we have to rebuild their hospitals, they have to rebuild their infrastructure. And we know that we cannot do this alone, but we will do this together. And I cannot tell you how heartened we are by the support we have received by yourself and from the United Nations. So soon after this catastrophe, you've arrived here yourself. I told you earlier that your resident coordinator has been driving around our country, from Balochistan through floodwaters of Sindh, all over the place. We are incredibly grateful to the United Nations. And I must say, a whole generation of Pakistanis, and we can't necessarily blame them, who might have a more cynical view of the United Nations. Today, your actions, your love, your support to us in this incredibly difficult time has reignited the faith of a generation of Pakistanis in the United Nations. And this is the generation that has to suffer the cost of climate change. I look forward, Your Excellency, to working with you and working with your team, not only to save the people of my country, but to work with other developing countries who have not contributed to the catastrophe of climate change, but are paying with their lives and livelihoods. And we have confidence. We have confidence in the United Nations. We have confidence in our international partners that they will not leave us in our difficult times. And we will build Pakistan back and build back better. Once again, Your Excellency, we're incredibly grateful for your presence.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister, for your kind words. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, good afternoon. I'm here to express my deep solidarity with the Pakistani people over the devastating loss of life, human suffering, and physical damage caused by this year's floods, a product of the intensification of climate change. Today, I was briefed by Prime Minister Sharif, Foreign Minister Bhutto, and other senior members of the government on the latest developments. Some regions of Pakistan have just experienced their wettest August on record, and rainfall in some provinces was up to 8 times higher than usual. Climate change is there. And tomorrow I'll see the impact of the floods in different areas of the country. But we have all seen media images of the extraordinary destruction. And I can only imagine the power and ferocity of the water as it bore down on villages, roads, bridges, and everything else in its path. It was clearly terrifying, a wall of water. And my heart goes out to everyone who has lost loved ones in the tragedy, and all those who have been affected by the loss of their homes, their businesses, and their livelihoods. I visited Pakistan many times when I was High Commissioner for Refugees. And Pakistan hosts one of the most effective and generous refugee operations of the world in support to millions of Afghans. So this is not my first visit to Pakistan. I have a love affair with the Pakistani people now for 17 years. I was, in 2005, talking to the victims of the earthquake. I remember the devastation of the floods in 2010. And I remember being with displaced people when you had this terrorist attack going down the Swat Valley and coming close to Islamabad, and seeing how dramatic their situation is. And many times in Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, I saw how Afghan communities were generously hosting Afghan refugees. And one thing I always discovered in Pakistan was the way people would support other people, Pakistanis or Afghans. Communities would support other communities with an enormous sense of generosity and solidarity. And so it is very emotional for me to see the level of suffering that so many Pakistanis are having at the present moment. Because it is heartbreaking to see such a generous people going through this crisis. No country deserves this fate, but particularly no countries like Pakistan that have done almost nothing to contribute to global warming. Pakistan and other developing countries, from the Horn of Africa to the Sahel, are paying a horrific price for the intransigence of big emitters that continue to bet on fossil fuels in the face of science, common sense, and basic human decency. Even today, emissions are rising as people die in floods and famines. And this is insanity. This is collective suicide. From Pakistan, I'm issuing a global appeal. Stop the madness, end the war with nature, invest in renewable energy now. And as the crisis gathers pace, it is clear that most countries are nowhere near prepared. Developed countries must step up and provide Pakistan and other countries on the front lines with the financial and technical resources they need to survive extreme weather events like these deadly floods. Half of all climate finance must go to adaptation and resilience in the developing world. And developed countries must produce a credible roadmap to back their commitment to double their financial support. Loss and damage from the climate crisis is not a future event. It is happening now, all around us. And I urge governments to address this issue at COP27 with the seriousness it deserves. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, the United Nations is on the ground to support the Pakistani government's relief efforts. We and the civil society are making good use of the funds released from the UN Central Emergency Response Fund, and we are stepping up our efforts through an air bridge from Dubai. Our people have delivered food or cash assistance to hundreds of thousands of people in Balochistan and Sindh, tons of emergency supplies to support children and women. But let's be clear, what we have done is a drop in the ocean of the needs of the Pakistani people. Hundreds of thousands of people are living in camps, and many more, 6 million, as far as I know, are with host communities that are sharing everything with them. An important reason for my visit is to draw the attention of the international community to this climate catastrophe and to appeal to massive support. Pakistan needs massive financial support for the relief and then for the recovery. And as I said this morning, and I repeat, it's not a matter of solidarity or generosity, it's a matter of justice. Before I conclude, allow me to say a few words about the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. On behalf of the United Nations, I extend my sincere condolences to the Queen's family and to the people of the United Kingdom and the wider Commonwealth. Queen Elizabeth exemplified the values of calmness, dignity, and grace. For as long as I can remember, she has been a reassuring presence on the global stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, for better time management, I would like to request you to pose a single, concise question so that we can have the corresponding answers. Gentlemen, on the right side, yes.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you, Your Excellency. It's Jiang Chao with China.
No accents.
It's Jiang Chao with China Xinhua News. Sorry, I will speak louder. It's John Chao with China's Xinhua News Agency. We have witnessed such a huge loss and damage in Pakistan due to flood and world climate change. And I understand that during a recent interview, Pakistani UN Ambassador Mr. Munir Akram said that Pakistan is one of the smallest emitters of carbon, while one of the largest victims of climate change. And it is the industrial countries, while have for the last 200 years contributed to global warming, and it is in developing countries, mostly like Pakistan, who are the victims. Therefore, for such damage, there should be some mechanism for loss and damage to compensate for those countries for the impact that they are facing because of the historical policies of industrialized countries that contributed to global warming. So how do you comment on it? Thank you.
Well, obviously that there are a number of countries in the world. We calculate about 15 hotspots where countries are particularly vulnerable and are already paying a heavy price in relation to climate change. Climate change is not a problem of the future. Climate change is a problem of today. It is happening. People are suffering. And that is why I said in my intervention, and I repeat now, the questions of loss and damage need to be seriously discussed. And that discussion that I hope will take place in the COP in Cairo, hopefully will be translated by an effective support from the developed world to the most impacted developing countries to build resilience and to adapt to the circumstances that were created by others. And that is why this is not a matter of generosity, it's a matter of justice.
Gentleman in the third row, Hannes.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the visiting dignitary. You've talked about justice to the Pakistanis precisely because of this climate change. But we've seen that the UN flash appeal is just $160 million, while the initial estimates are about $10 billion, and that can go up. So what will the UN do from your office to ensure that this appeal is magnified, this scope the horizon is widened up, and that justice monetarily for the people of Pakistan is ensured? Thank you.
When there is a crisis anywhere in the world, we issue in the next few days a so-called flash appeal. And the flash appeal has not as an objective to gather the funds to solve the problem. It has as an objective to raise some funds to start being able to act. We need much more than what was in that flash appeal. And especially the government of Pakistan must be supported directly by the international community. We have discussed today the possibility of organizing, and we are ready to organize it together with the Pakistani government. Of course, this is a decision for the Pakistani government to take. As soon as there is a clear assessment of the needs, both in relation to relief, but also in relation to rehabilitation and reconstruction, to organize an international conference aiming of a global mobilization of support to Pakistan at the levels which are many billion, let's be clear, at the levels that will be necessary to solve the problem. Flash appeals are something that we launch in any circumstances in the world, just to allow for agencies to start providing the minimum relief of the first days.
Thank you. A little bit of gender balance, Madam Sumaira.
Thank you, Excellency. This is Sumaira Khan from Sama Television. Sir, my question would be, you just talked about a conference, and I was about to ask that is there any donors conference on card, and if the Pakistani government and sorry?
Is there
any donor conference on the card?
I was about to ask you the same question. You just hinted upon that there would be there are chances of having a conference once the estimates are clear. So first part of my question would be from you, that if we are going to hold a donors conference, keeping in the view scenarios of the refugee situation as well, because we just had fall of Kabul last year and Russia-Ukraine situation as well. So having those scenarios simultaneously going on, do you think the other governments would be generous enough to contribute their wealth and their resources for the flood effectees of Pakistan? And second part is from the respected Foreign Minister of Pakistan. Sir, if there is a donor conference, how we are planning to present our facts and figures to the international community, and specifically, are we doing something about like attracting the other organization, OIC, for instance, and the like the forums we have for the Muslim Ummah?
Thank you.
Of course, I am worried with the fact that we are witnessing some reductions in official development aid, and that we have several of our operations severely underfunded. So there is a concern in relation to that. But this is not a usual event. This is an unprecedented event. And so I think this will, first of all, help us put again climate change in the front line of the international agenda. Climate change has been losing ground in the international agenda, both in relation to the political development and in relation to even the media coverage. And it's absolutely essential to put it again in the international agenda, because climate change is the defining issue of our time. And based on that, I have hopes that a conference being able to show, and I mean the images are absolutely, I mean, appalling. I believe a conference will be able to make conscience of people work and to mobilize the support that is needed. And this support is not only thinking about these floods. Let's not forget that monsoons have not ended, that the melting of glaciers will go on and for a number of years will still increase. So we need to support Pakistan to be prepared for the future, not only to respond to the present crisis.
Thank you for your question. First of all, I want to reiterate how grateful we are to the United Nations. There are scenarios where you're in a difficult situation and you say that I am facing this problem, I need help. In this situation, it wasn't that Pakistan reached out to the United Nations or the Secretary General and said, sir, we need your help. The Secretary General, on his own accord, is here, ready and willing to help. So I think it speaks to the compassion of the Secretary General of the United Nations and his leadership, that he has owned our crisis that is not only a Pakistani crisis, but is a global crisis. As far as your questions about the donor conference is concerned, so we've already had our flash appeal, like the Secretary General said. It's an initial appeal just for the basic, to sort of get things going. As far as the donor conference is concerned, that we are waiting for our damage assessment, a joint damage assessment, to be comprehensively completed. At the moment, we are still in the rescue and relief phase. We are still saving people from imminent danger, and we are still desperately trying to get rations and relief to those who need it. As we speak, places like Dadu and Sevan are desperately trying to save their populations from inundation, from flooding, while smaller towns and villages are being inundated by floodwater. One of the largest, if not the largest lake in Asia has broke its banks not once, not twice, but thrice. So we're still facing the sort of calamity itself. Once the water recedes, you will have a comprehensive damage needs assessment that will put us in a position to work with the international community. And we're very grateful once again that, and rather than me asking the Secretary General that, sir, I need your help for a donors conference, he himself has offered his good offices to support us in that event when the time comes.
So with your permission, I have two last questions, Mr. Karacha, followed by Mr. Madeen Haider.
Thank you very much. Excellency, thank you for coming over to Pakistan. I'm here, and you are not a stranger even for us. We acknowledge as a friend that he is here. Massive destruction that you talked about, and no end still for the miseries of human beings. But I was really touched when you also talked about the war on terror. And the biggest victim of the war on terror is rightly standing beside you, our young foreign minister who lost his leader, his mother, his mentor. Pakistani suffered 70, 80,000 people died and over $100 billion losses. And now the second, tragedy is in form of climate change. And again, Pakistanis are dying. Why Pakistan has to pay the prices every time whenever there is a crisis in the world? Would you advocate or would you consider talking to the world instead of a debt rescheduling? They should go for a debt write-off against Pakistan. और ऑनरेबल फॉरेन मिनिस्टर, मेरा आपसे सवाल ये है, सुबह जब ये सारे उठे होंगे तो इन्होंने इंग्लिश न्यूज़पेपर पढ़े होंगे और हर न्यूज़पेपर की हेडलाइन वो फ्लड विक्टिम्स के हवाले से नहीं है, वो इस तबाही और बर्बादी के बारे में नहीं है जो आपने देखी है, मैंने देखी है. वो हमारा पॉलिटिकल लड़ाई है जो हेडलाइंस में नज़र आ रही है. हम अगर खुद फोकस नहीं कर पा रहे, आई एम नॉट ब्लेमिंग एनी पार्टी, हम खुद फोकस नहीं कर पा रहे तो हम दुनिया की तरफ क्यों देखते हैं कि वो हमारी मदद करे. एंड आई रियली अप्रिशिएट मिस्टर जुलियन व्हेन ही लास्ट टाइम टॉक्ड the same thing and even asked us as a media to show the story of the world. Thank you.
If there is anything I've been talking all the time, especially since the beginning of the COVID, is the absolute need to have effective mechanisms of debt relief in the world for developing countries that are on the verge of financial collapse. We had just one initiative, as you remember, a suspension of the payment of debt now for 2 years for least developed countries. But there are no mechanisms of debt relief. There is a framework that has been very slow, and only 3 countries applied because it's not effective at all. And there are no mechanisms of debt relief in place, especially for middle-income countries. And this is something I've been putting as much as I can in the agenda of the G7, of the G20, of the meetings of the IMF and the World Bank, and I will not stop this campaign because I think it's absolutely essential. The risks for the world of a group of countries having defaults would be extremely, extremely high. We discussed today some creative ideas that we are trying to put on the table in different scenarios, namely in relation to climate change. And one of those ideas that I very much cherish and we are trying to promote as we speak is in relation to debt swaps for investments in adaptation, which means a country, instead of paying its debt, invests that money in transition for a green economy and in building resilience against the impacts of climate change. This idea was born in our discussions with small island developing states that are, as you know, some of the most impacted countries in the world, and some of them risk to disappear. And we are making a strong campaign with those that have power in the international financial institutions to adopt as a practical instrument of debt relief and of improvement of our climate action, the possibility of these swaps. Instead of paying a debt, you invest in adaptation and in the transition to a green economy.
और आपका जो दूसरा सवाल था पराचर साहब, I completely and utterly agree with you. हम तो for quite some time now we have been trying to advocate that our national attention and therefore then following which we'll see international attention should be on flood relief, the flood victims, on our fellow citizens that are facing a scale of a catastrophe that we have never seen in the existence of our country. And you're very right. Unfortunately, we get distracted by political events. And we're very grateful to those who've consistently engaged, particularly amongst the media community, because we know that there's a race for ratings. And unfortunately, उस race for ratings में कभी कभार जो अहम इशू होता है, जो प्रेसिंग इशू होता है, वो मिस हो जाता है, और जो सबसे ज़्यादा तमाशा करता है उनको स्पॉटलाइट दिया जाता है. We can't afford that right now. So our efforts and our focus from the very start have been on the flood victims, and our appeal to fellow political parties, particularly from the opposition, that there will be a time for politics. There will be a time for us to hold large rallies and jalsas and abuse each other in public. But this is not the time. This is the time to unite as a nation and to help desperately in need Pakistanis who are suffering in all 4 provinces of Pakistan.
Mr. Foreign Minister, with due respect, I would just like to say, I've noticed that whenever I come to this place, there are only selected a few journalists. They are always asked, they are always allowed to ask questions. We are from foreign media, and I've been raising my hand. I have just 2 quick questions. One question is, according to a 2019 report of Water Ministry, in the past there used to be natural waterways that could carry more than 1 million cubic water. And because of encroachment, that has shrunk to 100,000. Most of those who encroached upon, they are from the elite and super rich classes of Pakistan. What will government do to clear? Because many people believe, many experts believe that had they been cleared, this would not have brought big disaster. My second question is directed to the respected Secretary General. There are critics who believe that the United Nations failed in helping African countries get reparations for slavery. There were colonial power like the United Kingdom, according to Columbia University, looted $45 trillion from this region where you are standing, and they were not given any reparation. The United Nations failed in preventing France from carrying out nuclear detonation in South Pacific Ocean that has jeopardized the very existence of some countries. It failed in preventing United States, which is one of the biggest polluter in China, from spending on fossil fuel. So how can the people of Pakistan pin hopes on the United Nations that we are suffering from because of the misdeeds, because of the recklessness of the global north that has been spending on fossil fuels? The largest companies belong to global north. How can people of Pakistan pin hopes on the United Nations that it will help in this hours of test difficulties?
So thank you. I disagree that specific journalists are asked questions every time. For example, today my friend from the Chinese media and from Sama TV have asked me a question for the first time. Second of all, as far as encroachments are concerned, absolutely. Okay, monsoons mein, barishon mein, normal rain and weather events, they are encroachments on drains and on sewerage edges, natural waterways that could help the water exit faster. In this case, where we have a 100-kilometer lake that is developed in the middle of Pakistan, where from the mountains of Balochistan water is pouring in. From the skies above, we had 2 months of just flood from the skies. And when the Indus is, the floods of the Indus are descending down, all collecting in the province of Sindh to form that 100-meter lake that is still descending to our province. आप मुझे बताएं कि मैं कितना बड़ा ड्रेन बना दूं? कौन सा ड्रेन खड़ा हो सकता है? कहाँ डैम खड़ा हो सकता है जो 100 किलोमीटर वाइड लेक को रोक सकता है, जो 100 किलोमीटर वाइड लेक को ड्रेन कर सकता है? There is no man-made infrastructure that can evacuate this water. We are relying on gravity, and we're below sea level, and we're relying on what drain can compete with the mighty Indus. What drain can compete with such vast bodies of water? So I understand that in a normal sort of circumstance, aam barishon ke liye, you can talk about sort of the construction of elite housing societies and such things on natural. In this case, it is the disaster of such a scale that there is no drain that can address this issue.
Well, if there is something the United Nations, and me in particular, have been insisting very strongly in the last few years, is of the absolute need of developed countries to fully fulfill their commitments in the Paris Agreement in relation to support to developing countries. And we were behind the campaign that was made for adaptation to be taken seriously, and that led to the promise. Let's see what happens to the promise of $40 billion per year in support for adaptation in developing countries. And we are in the first line of putting in the agenda of the COP loss and damage. So we are really doing everything we can to push those issues in the agenda and put pressure for them to happen. But it's not the United Nations that decides those things. It's member states themselves, and it's the international financial institutions that manage, to a certain extent, if management is the right word to do, the global financial system. And if there is something that I've been saying loud and clear, is that our global financial system is morally bankrupted.
Excellency, it was actually right then it was taken away. One, there is another next point in South Asia, which is issue of Jammu and Kashmir. And whenever you come to this region, Pakistani leadership definitely takes you into confidence over peace and security. So peace and security is directly linked with the unresolved issue of Jammu and Kashmir. And India only listened to United Nations as a mediator. So tell us whether are you ready to mediate to ease relations between India and Pakistan? And connected to this is India is also trying to make entry into United Nations Security Council. So with the worst human rights violation record. So in the days to come, do you think India will be given entry into the UN Security Council? Or there are some other plans? What are other plans as far as reforms are concerned? Thank you.
As a matter of fact, if there is something that I've been always offering is my good offices in mediation. But as you know, the Indian side considers that this is a bilateral matter to be solved only by Pakistan and India, and the mediation of the United Nations has not been accepted until now. On the other hand, we have been very active in relation to the clear affirmation that human rights must be respected.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Another appointment. Thank you.
सेक्रेटरी जनरल अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा एंटोनियो गुतेरेस और वज़ीर ख़ारजा बिलावल भुट्टो ज़रदारी मुश्तरका न्यूज़ कॉन्फ्रेंस कर रहे थे। एंटोनियो गुतेरेस ने कहा कि पाकिस्तान के साथ मोहब्बत का रिश्ता है, पाकिस्तान के अवाम को मुश्किल में देखना मेरे लिए दुख का बायस है। इससे पहले भी पाकिस्तान का दौरा कर चुका हूँ। मौसमियाती तब्दीलियों ने पाकिस्तान में तबाही मचा दी है। इसके अलावा वज़ीर ख़ारजा ने कहा कि पाकिस्तान के सैलाब मुतासरा अवाम के लिए सहूलियात फराहम करना चाहते हैं। मुतासरा इलाकों में इस वक्त बीमारियाँ फैल रही हैं। पाकिस्तान को अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा से बेहतरीन मुआवनत हासिल हुई है। वज़ीर ख़ारजा बिलावल भुट्टो ने कहा कि पाकिस्तान को यकीन है कि आलमी शराकतदार और अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा के साथ मिलकर दोबारा बहाली को मुमकिन बना सकेंगे। PTV न्यूज़ से फिल वक्त इतना ही।
हालिया बारिशों ने मुल्क में 30 साला रिकॉर्ड तोड़ दिया है और अब तक लाखों अफराद सैलाब से मुतासिर हो चुके हैं। ये मासूम बच्चे, ये बेबस बहनें, ये भाई और ये बुजुर्ग आपकी फराख दिलाना इमदाद के मुंतजिर हैं। वजीर आजम पाकिस्तान मोहम्मद शहबाज शरीफ के सैलाब ज़दगान के लिए माली इमदाद की अपील। आप भी स्पेशल अकाउंट G12164 में दिल खोलकर इमदाद दें और अपने हमवतनों के जख्मों पर मरहम रखें। बैरून मुल्क मुकीम पाकिस्तानी वायर ट्रांसफर, मनी सर्विस ब्यूरो, मनी ट्रांसफर ऑपरेटर्स और एक्सचेंज हाउसेस के जरिए अतियात भिजवा सकते हैं। अंदरूनी मुल्क कमर्शियल बैंकों में भी नकद अतियात जमा करवाए जा सकते हैं।